We're taking a deep dive into Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. You mentioned that this one sort of gets overlooked, compared to some of her other ones.
Yeah.
So we're going to figure out what makes it tick, and I'm excited to explore this, this unique side of Austen.
Yeah, Northanger Abbey, it's really fascinating because even though it is, considered one of her earlier works,
Okay.
you can already see all the classic Austen things developing there.
Oh, cool.
The social commentary, her sharp wit, that amazing ability to capture human nature, like it's all there. It's just waiting to blossom.
It's like we're getting a sneak peek into her writer's brain.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So for anyone out there who hasn't had the pleasure of reading Northanger Abbey, how would you describe the tone of this one?
Well, it's definitely got this playful, almost satirical tone that I think sets it apart from some of her other more, serious romances.
Gotcha.
And the premise itself is quite unique for Austen. We have our main character, Catherine Morland, who is just absolutely obsessed with Gothic novels.
Yeah.
All those mysterious abbeys and brooding heroes.
Mm.
And maybe even a dash of murder.
Oh, I love that. Letting your imagination run wild. One detail that really cracked me up was from Austen in Autumn, where Catherine's actually worried that General Tilney, the master of Northanger Abbey,
Right.
might have murdered his wife. It's like she stepped right out of one of her books.
Yeah, she's totally letting those Gothic novels go to her head.
Totally.
But, connecting that back to the bigger picture, I think it's important to note that while Austen is kind of poking fun at those Gothic tropes, she's also a huge advocate for reading itself.
Okay.
She's defending novels as a worthwhile pursuit, even as she's satirizing them a bit,
Right. There's a great quote from Northanger Abbey that really brings that home. And it's highlighted in Girl with Her Head in a Book. And Austen writes, "The person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid."
Ooh, such a good quote. And I think it's a really effective way to contrast those characters who are really engaged with literature versus those who just dismiss it out of hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you see that play out, with characters like Henry and Eleanor Tilney,
Oh, absolutely.
who are both avid readers, and they're portrayed as intelligent and thoughtful. And then you have someone like John Thorpe, who scoffs at reading.
Right.
And he ends up being kind of shallow and foolish.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how our relationship with books can actually, shape the way we see the world.
That's a really insightful point. I love that.
And speaking of characters, we can't forget about Catherine Morland herself.
Oh, Catherine. She's such a unique and relatable protagonist.
I just adore her. She's so endearingly naive, and she has that classic teenage tendency to see drama everywhere.
Yes.
It's and there's this great anecdote in Girl with Her Head in a book where the author talks about overhearing this incredibly dramatic conversation between two teenagers at a cafe.
Oh, no.
They were just
No,
dissecting this recent breakup, and the angst was just palpable.
I can only imagine.
It was like something straight out of, a high school soap opera.
Oh, that's so Catherine.
It is.
That's exactly the kind of energy she brings to Northanger Abbey. And it's what makes her feel so authentic, especially, for those of us who remember those teenage years.
Oh, yeah, totally. And what I also found really refreshing was just how Austen describes Catherine physically.
Okay.
The review in the Booklover Sanctuary points out that she's thin, awkward, and not conventionally beautiful.
Right.
It's so different from a lot of the, heroines of that time period, and it makes her feel so much more real and endearing.
Yeah, it's it allows us to connect with her on a more personal level because we've all felt a bit awkward and out of place, especially in those teenage years.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the romantic relationship at the heart of the novel.
Okay.
The connection between Catherine and Henry Tilney definitely stands out as different from your typical Austen love story.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more playfulness and banter between them, almost like they're testing each other's intellect.
Totally.
The Booklover's Sanctuary review even mentions this great scene where Henry gently mocks Catherine's assumptions about Northanger Abbey.
Oh, I remember that scene.
Yeah, and teases her about keeping a journal.
It's so charming. You can feel the growing affection between them, even as they're challenging each other's ideas.
And, if you're enjoying this deep dive into Northanger Abbey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review.
Yes.
We love hearing from all you bookworms out there.
Yeah.
But let's get back to Catherine and Henry. This exchange between them really shows how how much Henry stands out
Okay.
from some of Austen's other heroes.
He really does. Henry Tilney, he's often praised for his intelligence, his wit, his kindness. He's a true gentleman
I like him.
in the best sense of the word.
Yeah.
And in fact, the author of Girl with Her Head in a Book even argues that Henry might be even more appealing than Mr. Darcy or Captain Wentworth.
Ooh.
What do you think?
Oh, no. That's a debate for the ages.
Right.
Who is the ultimate Austenian heartthrob?
Exactly.
Maybe that's a deep dive for another episode.
Yes, we'll have to save that for later.
We'll put a pin in that one. But for now, let's get back to all those fascinating characters in Northanger Abbey.
Okay.
I find it interesting how Austen contrasts the different sibling groups.
Yeah.
The Morlands, the Tilneys, the Thorpes.
Mm.
Their personalities and their relationships really, push the story forward.
It's true. And speaking of characters, I think one who deserves a closer look is Isabella Thorpe. She's often portrayed as, manipulative and shallow, but Girl with Her Head in a Book made a point that really resonated with me.
Okay.
We need to understand her motivations and her insecurities.
Yeah.
As a young woman in a society that was just obsessed with marriage, her options were so limited.
Right.
And that context makes her actions, while sometimes misguided, a bit more understandable.
It's so easy to judge characters based on those first impressions.
Right.
But Austen really encourages us to dig a little deeper.
Yes.
To see those societal pressures that might be shaping their choices. It adds like a whole other layer of complexity to the novel.
It reminds us that things aren't always as black and white as they seem.
I like that.
And now shifting gears a bit, I can't help but mention the vivid setting of Northanger Abbey.
Yes.
The descriptions of Bath, which was a very popular tourist destination even back then, really bring the story to life.
It's like we're right there with Catherine, strolling through those streets, just soaking up the atmosphere.
And Austen's portrayal of Bath goes beyond just the physical beauty of the city. She captures the social dynamics, the anxieties, the constant undercurrent of gossip and speculation that seems to follow these characters wherever they go.
It makes you wonder if Bath was really like that back then, or if Austen was using the setting to subtly comment on the society she lived in.
It's a fascinating question. I think it was probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Bath was known for its, vibrant social scene, but Austen definitely had a knack for observing those little nuances of human behavior and then weaving them into her stories.
Yeah, and speaking of social commentary, Northanger Abbey is full of it.
It is.
Even though it's often seen as, a lighter, more comedic novel compared to some of her other works.
You're right. And one theme that really resonated with me was this idea of navigating societal expectations, especially for young women. Catherine's journey is all about learning to distinguish between the fantasy world of her beloved novels and the sometimes harsh realities of everyday life.
It's like she has to unlearn all those romanticized notions.
Yeah.
And come to terms with the fact that people aren't always who they appear to be.
Exactly.
And relationships are way more complex than those whirlwind romances that she's always reading about.
And in a way, I think Austen is kind of challenging those traditional conventions of romantic love.
Okay.
There's a subtle suggestion that, women have their own desires and should have more agency in their lives.
Right.
Even within, the constraints of society at the time.
It's pretty revolutionary for that time period. It's like she's planting these little seeds of rebellion.
Yes.
Questioning the idea that women should just passively wait for love to come along.
Exactly. I love that interpretation.
Yeah.
It speaks to Austen's brilliance as a writer.
Totally.
She can make you laugh one moment and then make you think deeply about societal norms the next round.
That's what makes her work so enduring.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's entertaining, it's thought-provoking, it's still so relevant to us today.
Absolutely.
And if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast.
Yes.
And leave us a review. We always appreciate your feedback.
We do.
But back to Northanger Abbey. One thing I find myself thinking about is how much this novel celebrates reading.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a love letter to the power of stories and the joy of just getting lost in a good book.
It really is. But it's not just about escapism, is it?
Right.
There's also this element of how reading can actually broaden our perspectives, help us develop those critical thinking skills.
Yeah, for sure.
And you really see that play out in Catherine's journey throughout the novel. Her reading habits, even though they lead her down some humorous paths initially, they ultimately help her become a more discerning judge of character and a stronger, more independent person.
It's like she learns to separate the fantasy from reality.
Exactly.
The melodrama from genuine emotion.
Yeah, and speaking of melodrama, one of the things I find so fascinating about Northanger Abbey is how Austen really plays with those conventions of the Gothic novel.
Oh, totally. It's like she takes those classic elements.
Yeah.
The mysterious abbeys, the brooding heroes, that sense of lurking danger.
Right.
And then she kind of turns them upside down.
It's so clever.
She's winking at the reader saying, we can enjoy these tropes, but let's not take them too seriously.
Exactly. She's poking fun at the over-the-top drama, the tendency to see darkness and intrigue where there really is none.
Right.
But at the same time, she also acknowledges the power of those stories to capture our imaginations. It's such a delicate balance, and she pulls it off brilliantly.
She does.
I think it's a good reminder that while it's fun to get lost in these fictional worlds, it's also important to, ground ourselves in reality and approach things with a little healthy skepticism.
Yeah. And Catherine's misadventures at Northanger Abbey really highlight that.
I do.
She learns that real life is rarely as dramatic as those Gothic novels that she loves.
Yes.
And true heroes don't always fit the mold.
And what's fascinating is that even though Austen is satirizing those elements, there's still a sense of affection for the genre.
Right.
She understands the appeal, the way these stories can transport us to another time and place.
Right. And that's what makes Northanger Abbey so unique. It's a social commentary. It's a coming-of-age story.
Yeah.
It's a satire of Gothic literature.
Yeah.
But at its heart, it's really a celebration of the power of storytelling.
Beautifully said. And despite all the humor and satire, the novel ends on such a hopeful note.
Yeah.
Catherine, she finds love. She learns some valuable lessons. She emerges as a stronger, more independent person.
And that's one of the things I love about Austen is even when she's exposing, the flaws and the follies of society, there's always that underlying sense of optimism.
Yes.
A belief in the possibility of happiness and growth.
It's a good reminder that even in a world that can sometimes feel chaotic and unpredictable, there's still beauty to be found, connections to be made, and stories waiting to be told.
I love that.
And Northanger Abbey is a perfect example of that. It's a charming, witty, and ultimately uplifting story that encourages us to embrace the joy of reading, to laugh at ourselves, and to never stop believing in happy endings.
I like that.
If you haven't already experienced the delight that is Northanger Abbey, we highly encourage you to give it a read.
Yes.
Be sure to check the episode description for a link to purchase a copy.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Jane Austen, don't forget to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast.
Yes, please subscribe.
And leave us a review.
Yes, leave a review.
We love hearing from fellow book lovers.
We do.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for listening.
Oh, now that's a debate for the ages. Who is the ultimate Austenian heartthrob?
I know, right?
But maybe that's a deep dive for another episode.
Yes. Another time. Another time.
We'll put a pin in that one. But for now, let's get back to all those fascinating characters in Northanger Abbey.
Okay, sounds good.
I find it really interesting how Austen contrasts all the different sibling groups.
The
Morlands and the Tilneys and the Thorpes.
Yeah.
Their personalities and relationships, they really kind of drive the story forward.
It's true. And speaking of characters, one who I think deserves a closer look is Isabella Thorpe.
Okay.
She's often portrayed as manipulative and shallow.
Right.
But Girl with Her Head in a Book made a point that really resonated with me.
Okay.
We need to understand her motivations and insecurities.
Yeah.
As a young woman in a society that was just obsessed with marriage, her options were so limited.
Right.
And, in that context, her actions, while sometimes misguided, are more understandable.
It's so easy to judge characters based on those first impressions.
I know, it's true.
But Austen really encourages us to kind of dig a little deeper and see the societal pressures that might be shaping their choices.
Exactly.
It adds a whole nother layer of complexity to the novel.
It does. It reminds us that things aren't always as black and white as they might seem.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Now, shifting gears a bit, I have to mention the vivid setting of Northanger Abbey.
Oh, yes, Bath.
Yes, Bath.
Such a great setting.
The descriptions of Bath, which was a popular tourist destination even way back then.
It was, yeah.
It really brings the story to life.
It does. It's like we're right there with Catherine walking those streets.
I know. Strolling through those elegant streets, just soaking it all in.
Absolutely. And, you know, Austen's portrayal of Bath, it goes beyond just the physical beauty of the city.
Right.
She captures those social dynamics, you know,
Yeah.
the anxieties, like the constant undercurrent of gossip and speculation that follows these characters everywhere.
It makes you wonder, like, was Bath really like that back then?
Right.
Or was Austen using the setting to, you know, subtly comment on the society she lived in?
That's such a good question. I think it was probably a little bit of both. You know?
Yeah, probably.
Bath was known for this, like, vibrant social scene, but Austen definitely had a knack for observing these little nuances of human behavior and weaving them into her stories.
For sure. And speaking of social commentary, Northanger Abbey is full of it.
Oh, it is?
Even though it's often seen as, you know, a lighter, more comedic novel compared to some of her other works.
You're right. And one theme that really resonated with me was this idea of navigating societal expectations, especially for young women.
Right.
Catherine's journey is all about, you know, learning to distinguish between that fantasy world of her beloved novels and the sometimes harsh realities of everyday life.
It's like she has to kind of unlearn all those romanticized notions and come to terms with the fact that, you know, people aren't always who they appear to be.
Exactly.
Relationships are way more complex than, you know, those whirlwind romances that she's reading about.
Totally. And I think in a way, Austen's kind of challenging those traditional conventions of romantic love.
Right.
There's this subtle suggestion that women have their own desires and should have more agency in their own lives, even within, you know, the constraints of society at that time.
It's pretty revolutionary for that time period. Yeah. It's like she's planting these little seeds of rebellion.
Yes, exactly.
Questioning this idea that women should just, you know, passively wait for love to come along.
I love that interpretation. It really speaks to Austen's brilliance as a writer.
It does.
You know, she can make you laugh one moment and then make you think really deeply about those societal norms the next.
That's what makes her work so enduring.
Absolutely.
It's entertaining, it's thought-provoking, and it's still so relevant to us today.
It really is. And if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast and leave us a review.
Yes, we love hearing from you.
We do.
But back to Northanger Abbey. One thing I find myself thinking about a lot is just how much this novel celebrates reading. It's almost like a love letter to the power of stories. And the joy of just getting lost in a good book. It really does feel like Austen is giving a nod to all us bookworms out there.
She is. But it's not just about escapism, though, is it? There's also that element of how reading can broaden our perspectives and help us, you know, develop those critical thinking skills.
Right.
It's about finding that balance, you know, between getting lost in a story and using our own judgment to navigate the real world. And you really see that playing out in Catherine's journey throughout the novel. You know, her reading habits, even though they lead her down these kind of humorous paths initially, ultimately they help her become a more discerning judge of character and a stronger, more independent person.
Yeah, she learns to separate that fantasy from reality.
Exactly.
That melodrama from genuine emotion.
Yes. And speaking of melodrama, one of the things I find so fascinating about Northanger Abbey is just how Austen plays with those conventions of the Gothic novel.
It's so clever. Like, she takes those classic elements, you know, the mysterious abbeys, the brooding heroes, that sense of lurking danger, and then she turns them upside down.
It's so true. It's like she's winking at the reader saying, let's not take this too seriously.
Right, like we can enjoy these tropes, but let's not get carried away.
She's poking fun at that over-the-top drama, you know, that the tendency to see darkness and intrigue where there is none.
But at the same time, she's acknowledging the power of these stories to capture our imaginations.
It's a delicate balance, and she pulls it off so well.
She does.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that, you know, while it's fun to get lost in those fictional worlds, it's important to also, you know, ground ourselves in reality and approach things with a healthy dose of skepticism.
A little bit, yeah. And Catherine's misadventures at Northanger Abbey really highlight that for us.
They do.
You know, she learns that real life is rarely as dramatic as those Gothic novels she loves.
Right. And true heroes don't always fit the mold.
They don't. And what I find so fascinating is that even though Austen is satirizing these elements, there's still this sense of affection for the genre. You know, she understands the appeal.
Right.
The way that these stories can transport us to another time and place.
And that's what makes Northanger Abbey so unique.
Yeah.
It's a social commentary. It's a coming-of-age story. It's a satire of Gothic literature.
Yeah.
But at its heart, it's really a celebration of the power of storytelling.
Beautifully said. And, you know, despite all the humor and the satire, the novel ends on such a hopeful note. You know, Catherine finds love, she learns some valuable lessons, and she emerges as a stronger, more independent person.
And that's one of the things I love about Austen, is that even when she's exposing the flaws and the follies of society, there's always this underlying sense of optimism. This belief in the possibility of happiness and growth.
It's a good reminder that even in a world that can sometimes feel chaotic and unpredictable, there's still beauty to be found. Connections to be made and stories waiting to be told.
I love that.
And Northanger Abbey is the perfect example of that, you know? It's charming, it's witty, and ultimately uplifting. And it really encourages us to embrace the joy of reading, laugh at ourselves, and never stop believing in happy endings.
I like that. And if you haven't already experienced the delight that is Northanger Abbey, we highly encourage you to give it a read.
Please do.
Be sure to check the episode description for a link to buy a copy.
Yes, you can find it right there.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Jane Austen, don't forget to subscribe to the Book Nook podcast and leave us a review. We love hearing from fellow book lovers.
We do.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for listening.